That night, around 3 a.m., I was driving back home when I saw the words, "Help me," written across the back windshield of a gray Impala. At first, I thought it was just some stupid prank, until... Hi, my name is Jared. Most of my friends just call me Jay. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 7 years, I've been working my way up the ladder at a third-party supply chain firm based out of Canton, Ohio, where I recently took over as the Senior Regional Logistics Coordinator. If you don't know what that job entails, my entire professional existence is built around predictability, mapping, and cold, hard data. I spend my days tracking freight truck routes across the Midwest, calculating transit times, anticipating weather delays, and managing risk. My brain is basically hardwired to look for patterns, to find order in chaos, and to always favor the safest, most logical path forward. I'm a practical, ordinary guy who thrives on routine. I've never been the type to buy into urban legends, creepy internet threads, or ghost stories. But what happened to me on a cold night in late November is something that completely broke my sense of reality. It's a story that still keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and I'm telling you right now, after you hear how this unfolded, late-night drives down those empty, forgotten roads will never feel the same for you guys either. Before I start, I want to give you a genuine warning. If you're the kind of person who frequently drives alone on dark, rural state routes after midnight, you might want to lock your doors and look around your room before you listen to this. Pay attention to how easily a perfectly normal, grounded night can completely slip away from you. It all started on a crisp Saturday night. Two of my absolute best friends from my Ohio State University days, Jim and Sean, were driving back from a sports expo in Columbus. Since we hadn't seen each other in nearly 5 years due to our chaotic career tracks, we decided to meet up at a mutual halfway point. We picked the Crossroads Diner, a legendary 24-hour neon-lit silver diner sitting right off Interstate 70 near Zanesville, Ohio. We grabbed a booth in the back around 8:30 p.m. It was exactly what you'd expect from an old-school Ohio diner. The sharp smell of fried onions and stale coffee, worn brown vinyl seats patched with duct tape, and a low jukebox humming in the corner. We spent hours laughing, tearing through a few baskets of classic double cheeseburgers and greasy fries, and reminiscing about our old college apartments. Now, I'll be honest with you, when we first sat down, we all shared a couple of local craft beers with our food. But because I was acutely aware of the grueling hour-and-a-half drive I had ahead of me through the pitch-black back roads of Guernsey and Tuscarawas counties to get back to my place in Canton, I cut myself off early. By midnight, I had switched entirely to thick, bitter black coffee. By the time we finally paid the bill, hugged it out in the gravel parking lot, and promised not to wait another half-decade to catch up, it was sometime around 2:30 in the morning. I was completely clear-headed, sober, and riding that pleasant, energetic high you get after an incredible night with old friends. But as I climbed into my SUV, I could definitely feel the deep, heavy chill of the Ohio winter settling into the air. I started the engine, set the heater to blast warm air directly at my feet, and consciously cracked the driver's side window by about an inch. I wanted that freezing, biting night air to constantly hit my face to make sure any lingering fatigue couldn't creep up on me. I queued up a mellow indie rock playlist on my phone, pulled out of the brightly lit perimeter of the Crossroads Diner, and headed north. The first 20 minutes of the drive were deeply therapeutic. I left the interstate corridor behind and rolled onto State Route 800. It's a 2-lane highway that cuts through the rolling hills and dense forestry of eastern Ohio. At that hour of the morning, the road belonged entirely to me. The passing gas stations and distant porch lights gradually thinned out until they disappeared altogether, replaced by a continuous, suffocating wall of towering, skeletal oaks and pines on either side of the asphalt. There wasn't another set of headlights in my rearview mirror, and there was nothing oncoming. Just the steady hum of my tires and the bright glow of my high beams cutting a path through the dark. I must have been driving for a while, just lost in my own thoughts, when I experienced the first weird occurrence. I was cruising along at normal highway speed, around 55 miles an hour, when my headlights briefly flashed over a vehicle pulled off onto the grass shoulder on my right. It was parked right next to the rotting remnants of an abandoned wooden farm stand. I didn't get a good look at it at all. It was just a split-second, incredibly vague glimpse of a dull, dark sedan sitting in the shadows. But as I flew past it, my lights caught something written on the rear windshield. It looked like someone had smeared away the dirt with their fingers to write 2 words, "Help me." I didn't step on the brakes, and I didn't slow down. When you're driving at that speed past a dark shoulder, your brain doesn't instantly register things perfectly. I just sort of blinked, shook my head, and kept going. I honestly thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me because of the late hour and the monotonous road. And even if something was written there, I figured it was just local high school kids pulling a dumb, unoriginal weekend prank to mess with passing cars. It was a harmless stunt, or maybe it didn't even say what I thought it said. I dismissed it entirely, watching the dark shape quickly shrink and dissolve into the absolute blackness behind me as I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I reached a fork in the road and took a left onto County Road 12. This was a much narrower, poorly maintained route that served as a shortcut through the valley. The shift in environment was immediate. The smooth asphalt transitioned into a rough, patched chip seal surface that made my tires vibrate with a loud, hollow drone. The trees here pressed tightly against the gravel shoulders, their massive, bare branches arching completely over the road like a claustrophobic ribcage, blocking out the moonlight. As I rounded a sharp, blind curve, my headlights illuminated another shape parked on the right edge of the road up ahead. Because I was already primed by that first weird glimpse at the farm stand, I actually paid attention this time. I didn't pull over, but I eased my foot off the accelerator, letting my speed drop down to about 35 miles an hour so I could actually investigate the vehicle as I approached from behind. Under the steady, direct glow of my high beams, the rear of the car finally came into focus. It was an old, washed-out gray sedan, specifically a mid-2000s Chevy Impala, identified by its distinct, flat, circular taillights. The entire body was caked in a thick, uniform layer of chalky road dust, like it had been sitting in a dead barn for a decade. As my lights washed over the back of the car, I noticed that the rear driver's side hubcap was completely missing, exposing a raw, rusted black steel wheel at the corner. And there, Written unmistakably across the grime of the rear windshield were two words scratched through the dust with someone's fingers: "Help me." I didn't experience some dramatic movie-like chill down my spine, and my heart didn't stop. To be honest, I was just really confused and a bit annoyed. My logistics-trained brain immediately started trying to connect the dots. Did I just pass the same car? No, that makes zero sense. I had been moving at a steady speed since the farm stand, and absolutely nobody had overtaken me on this narrow, empty road. There were no hidden cut-throughs or parallel routes in these dense woods that would allow a car to leapfrog ahead of me. I reasoned that it had to be a bizarre coincidence. It's a common, cheap car model. Maybe a local group of pranksters from the nearby rural high school had bought two identical junkers from a scrapyard and staged a multi-part joke along this route for the weekend. But the explanation felt a little forced, even to me. It left a strange, lingering knot of curiosity in my stomach. I reached over and twisted the volume dial, shutting off my radio completely. The sudden, absolute silence inside the cabin made the sound of my own breathing feel unnaturally loud. Another few miles ticked by in total desolation. The road grew progressively worse, the deep potholes forcing me to navigate with hyper-focused caution. There were no mailboxes, no farmhouses, no signs of human life anywhere. There was just the narrow ribbon of road, the suffocating wall of trees, and my own mounting skepticism. Then my headlights caught a flash of dull gray metal up ahead for the third time. This time, the gray Impala looked like it had been deliberately parked there. It was pulled tightly onto a shallow, muddy gravel turnout on the right shoulder, facing north in the same direction I was traveling. The entire scenario, though, had shifted into something far more alarming. The front driver's side door, which was facing the road, was completely unlatched, resting ajar by about 3 or 4 inches, though no interior dome light was active inside the pitch-black cabin. My foot hit the brake pedal hard. My SUV groaned to a halt, my tires crunching loudly on the loose stones as I rolled slowly past the vehicle. I stopped my car about 15 feet ahead, shifted into reverse, and carefully backed up along the asphalt until I was idling completely parallel to the stationary Impala. I kept my foot firmly pressed down on the brake pedal, leaving the engine running and my doors locked. Because my headlights were pointing straight down the empty road ahead, the entire driver's side of the Impala was shrouded in heavy, suffocating shadows cast by the overhanging trees. Leaning across the center console toward the passenger side, I reached over and tapped my passenger window switch. The low, mechanical whine of the electric motor felt incredibly loud in the quiet cabin as the glass slid down into the door frame. I pulled my cell phone from its mount, turned on its built-in flashlight, and pointed the bright beam straight out through the open window, projecting it across the small gap of asphalt to illuminate the side of the Impala. The beam of light washed over the vehicle, and my eyes immediately went down to confirm the details. There was the missing hubcap, exposing that raw, rusted black steel rim on the rear driver's side wheel. And as I traced the light forward along the body, I noticed a long, distinct dent scoring the lower rocker panel for the first time. Seeing that wheel confirmed 100% that this was the exact same car from the previous encounter. I swept the flashlight beam up toward the side windows, and that's when my breath caught. Someone had used their fingers to press through the heavy, chalky dust on this side of the car. On the front driver's side window, the one on the door sitting slightly ajar, The word please was wiped into the grime. Right behind it, on the rear driver's side passenger window, it read, "Help me." My mind raced, trying to mathematically map out what this meant. In the first two encounters, the writing had been explicitly on the back of the car. Driven by a pure, analytical need to find the pattern, I flicked off the flashlight, took my foot slightly off the brake, and reversed my SUV a little bit further back into the dark. I kept backing up until the Impala was entirely ahead of me, allowing my powerful high beams to shine directly onto the rear of the vehicle. I stared through my own windshield, focusing entirely on the rear windshield of the Impala. It was completely blank. The thick, chalky layer of road dust on the rear windshield was entirely undisturbed, smoothly covering the glass with absolutely no trace of the words that had been there just minutes before. That was the exact moment where the situation stopped feeling like a high school prank. The writing hadn't just been added to the sides, it had completely vanished from the back. How could someone completely clear off a rear windshield and rewrite a message on the side doors while the car was sitting alone on an empty county road? The warmth of my SUV's heater suddenly felt oppressive, making it hard to breathe. My hands were slick with sweat against the steering wheel. My mind was a complete battlefield, frantically debating what to do. I hovered my thumb directly over my phone screen, preparing to dial 911. But that deeply ingrained, practical fear of looking foolish stopped me. What exactly would I tell the Ohio State Highway Patrol dispatcher? Yes, I'm on a dark county road, and a dusty car keeps appearing ahead of me, and now the writing is moving around the windows. I could already hear the irritation in an operator's voice. I imagined a local sheriff's deputy rolling up an hour later, finding an abandoned vehicle that some local kids had dumped days ago, and looking at me like a paranoid office worker who couldn't handle a late-night drive in the woods. At first, I felt embarrassed for even taking it seriously, constantly second-guessing my own eyes. But after a while, that anxiety slowly turned into a stubborn frustration. I put the phone back, shifted into drive, and accelerated away. But my eyes remained completely glued to my rearview mirror, watching that unlatched door and those marked side windows fade into the shadows. The guilt hit me almost immediately, mixing with a growing, obsessive need to understand what the hell was actually happening. My mind was trapped in a loop, replaying the image of that open door and the desperate new arrangement of words. What if someone was actually out there? A few minutes later, I reached an isolated intersection. My high beams shone directly onto a weathered, rusting green metal street sign marking the dark lane branching off to my left. Old Mill Road. Hanging directly beneath it, suspended by a piece of dirty twine that twirled slowly and rhythmically in the freezing midnight breeze, was a square piece of torn, corrugated cardboard. Written across it in thick, hurried, uneven black marker were the words, "Please help me." And beneath that desperate text, a crude, jagged arrow pointed straight to the left, directing me down into that unlit road. I brought the SUV to a complete, shuddering halt right in the dead center of the empty intersection. A sensible adult would have driven straight through and gone home. Every logical red flag in my brain was screaming that this was a trap, but the sheer escalation of the breadcrumbs, the fact that it felt like a trail laid out specifically for whoever was driving this route tonight, had completely hooked me. Driven by a volatile, irrational mix of anxiety and stubborn fixation, I turned the steering wheel to the left. My tires transitioned onto Old Mill Road with a loud, violent crunch of loose stone. Civilization vanished the moment I turned that corner. The gravel lane was incredibly narrow, lined on both sides by dense, choking undergrowth and overgrown weeds that scraped lightly against the sides of my SUV. I was forced to drop my speed to a crawl to avoid the deep, water-filled potholes. The canopy of ancient pines completely blotted out the night sky, plunging the narrow corridor into a total, suffocating darkness. After a grueling mile of winding deeper into the woods, the claustrophobic lane abruptly broke open. The trees suddenly receded, and the road terminated into a massive, desolate opening, a huge, flat, field-like clearing. Under the pale, fractured moonlight, the field looked completely abandoned, choked with tall, dying wild grass that swayed rhythmically in the winter wind. A menacing, unbroken wall of towering pines surrounded the perimeter of the clearing like a fortress, cutting it off entirely from the rest of the world. Standing right in the absolute center of this field was an isolated two-story wooden house. Its timber exterior was severely weathered, rotted into a skeletal, ash-gray color. The windows were entirely dark, completely devoid of curtains or blinds, reflecting the moonlight like empty, lifeless eye sockets. There were no neighboring structures, no power lines, no signs of electricity, just a decaying monument of wood and shadow. And far ahead of me, parked at a harsh, hurried angle, right near the collapsed wooden steps of the front porch, was the faint shape of a vehicle. From this distance of about 90 feet away, it was just a generic dark outline. I couldn't make out the color, the make, or whether anyone was sitting inside it. Even with my powerful high beams cutting across the clearing, the intense white light was hitting the glass windows of the two-story house, creating a blinding, blown-up glare that bounced heavily right back into my face. Between that reflective glare and the shadows, the car looked like nothing more than a flat silhouette against the rotted wood of the porch. I brought my SUV to a complete stop right there at the absolute edge of the tree line where the narrow lane met the open field, keeping myself 90 feet back. Even in my heightened state of panic, my logistics mind took over. I intentionally left that massive distance between my vehicle and the house, ensuring my front tires were already angled sharply back toward the gravel road for a clean, unobstructed escape route if I needed to flee. I reached over and clicked the dial, shutting off my high beams and my headlights completely. Then I turned the key, killing the engine entirely. I did that for two very specific, practical reasons. First, by killing the aggressive white glare reflecting off the house windows, my eyes could finally adjust to the natural moonlight and actually map out the clearing. Second, I didn't want to draw any more attention to myself than I already had. If this was an ambush or a trap, I didn't want to broadcast my exact position with idling headlights. And conversely, if there was a terrified victim out there, I didn't want them panicking and running off before I even understood what was happening. The sudden, absolute silence of the deep woods dropped over me like a physical weight, so heavy it made my ears ring. I reached down, grabbed my phone, and slipped it into my front jacket pocket. I stepped out onto the damp earth, closing the car door softly until it clicked shut without locking it, keeping my escape route wide open. My boots sank slightly into the wet, cold dirt next to my SUV. I stood there, alone in the dark, the winter wind rustling through the tall grass of the open field, staring at the silent house. Right there, standing on that wet, cold dirt with the car door freshly shut behind me, the last bit of safety I was clinging to totally vanished. When you're sitting inside the sealed, warm cabin of your car, even when it's wrapped in total silence, you still feel completely insulated, like you're just an observer watching a movie. But the second I was out there in the open, staring down that 90-foot stretch of dead grass toward where that decaying house loomed in the dark, the true reality of what I was doing hit me like a ton of bricks. The air was bitterly cold, that biting, heavy, late November Ohio freeze that carries the distinct scent of upcoming snow, dead leaves, and damp earth rot. It didn't just hit my skin, it sliced straight through the canvas layers of my jacket, settling deep into my joints and making my lungs ache with every sharp breath I took. The wind was low but steady, making the tall, dead wild grass hiss rhythmically against my shins, and in the distance, the bare tree branches were creaking and groaning in the dark like old ship timber straining under immense pressure. There wasn't a single normal sound out there. No crickets, no faint, distant hum of traffic from the state route I'd left behind. Absolutely nothing. It was this heavy, pressurized, suffocating silence that felt almost oppressive, because my brain was desperately straining to find something familiar to latch onto. Standing right there next to my SUV, I felt completely naked. My brain was screaming at me that I was being a total idiot. I'm a practical guy. I manage risk and look for logical patterns for a living. And here I was, wandering onto an unlit, abandoned property in the middle of nowhere with absolutely no protection. From 90 feet back, it was just way too dark to see any real details on that parked car. But I forced my legs to start moving anyway, my boots sinking into the soft, frosted dirt as I began the long, agonizing walk across the open field. I had my hands deep in my jacket pockets, tightly squeezing my phone, but I never took it out to turn on the flashlight. If I turned on my phone's flashlight and started shining it around the clearing, it would have acted like a massive beacon. It would instantly tip off whoever or whatever might be hiding inside that house, staring down from those dark windows. And on the flip side, if there was an actual, terrified victim out here, the last thing I wanted to do was scare them half to death by letting them see some strange guy wandering through the dark with a flashlight. I just wanted to keep a low profile, get close enough to see what I was dealing with without drawing any attention, and get out. I kept my footsteps as quiet as humanly possible, my eyes darting violently back and forth between the blacked-out windows of the house and the vehicle ahead. It wasn't until I finally came close to the car, getting within about 15 yards, that the outline completely cleared up under the sky. From the distinct, flat back end and those circular tail lights, I could see right away it was a mid-2000 Chevy Impala. Looking back, the obvious thing to check would have been the license plate. But to be completely honest with you, every single time I had come across that car earlier, my attention immediately went straight to those creepy "help me" messages. Those frantic cries for help completely dominated my focus, and I never consciously paid any attention to the plate itself. Standing out there in that clearing, I realized I couldn't remember a single letter or number from any of those moments to even compare it to. I was already fairly certain this was the same car, but a quiet unease was settling over me. The windows were pitch black, and an increasing discomfort crept in as I worried that maybe somebody was sitting completely still inside that cabin, just waiting in the dark. Since I was approaching the vehicle from behind, my very first instinct was to step right up behind the trunk and check the back windshield to see if those creepy "help me" messages were there, especially since the glass was right at eye level. I stared directly at the rear windshield, fully bracing myself to see "help me" smeared into the grime like before. But under the dark sky, the glass was completely blank. The thick, chalky layer of road dust was totally undisturbed, just a smooth, uniform coating of dirt with absolutely no trace of the words. To check the rest of the glass, I slowly and quietly moved towards the left side, the driver's side, keeping my eyes glued to the side windows where the text had shifted during my last encounter on the turnout. I looked at the front driver's side window and the rear window right behind the driver, expecting to see "please help me" written there again. But nothing. Those side windows were completely blank too. Those desperate cries for help that had been following me all night were just gone, wiped away or missing entirely. Since there was absolutely nothing written on any of the glass to give me a clue, my eyes naturally dropped down to check for any other physical markings. The moon was almost entirely full and incredibly bright, cutting right through the thin winter clouds and casting a stark, pale silver light across the whole clearing. Because I had turned off my headlights and sat in the pitch black for a minute before getting out, my eyes had completely adjusted to the dark. That silver moonlight hit the driver's side of the car at a perfect angle, and since my night vision had fully kicked in, the physical details stood out clearly. Looking down, I noticed the rear driver's side hubcap was completely gone, exposing that raw, rusted black steel wheel rim, and tracing further forward along the lower body, the moonlight caught the deep contours of that long, distinct dent scoring the rocker panel. These were the exact same markings I remembered from the road earlier. There was no real doubt left. It was the same car. With that certainty established, the focus of my fear instantly shifted to something way more disturbing. The mystery was no longer the identity of the car. It was the person or thing connected to it. What I couldn't understand was how it got here ahead of me. I had taken the only single-lane gravel entry into this place, and the road ahead of me had been totally empty the entire time. How did it get here? Who brought it here? Was somebody driving it? Had someone been sitting inside the whole time? Or worse, were they trailing my movements in the pitch black, deliberately leading me down this breadcrumb trail? The thought that someone might have been watching me during those earlier encounters made my chest tighten up so bad I could barely swallow. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but instead of turning back to my SUV, I knew I needed to check the rest of the vehicle to see if there was anything on the other side, instead of walking around the front bumper, which would have forced me closer to the rotted porch steps and completely turned my back to those dark house windows. I made the conscious, safer decision to walk back around the rear bumper to approach the passenger side from the back. By looping around the rear of the Impala and moving up the passenger side facing north, the house stayed right ahead of my line of sight the entire time, keeping my eyes locked on the danger. This side of the car sat deep in shadow because the house was blocking most of the moonlight. I stepped right up against the dusty panels, almost brushing my jacket against the grime, and leaned my face inches away from the passenger window glass to see if anyone was inside. Nobody was, but someone had freshly dragged their fingers through the heavy, chalky dust on the front passenger window. It spelt out one single word in messy block letters, inside. And right under it, a crude, jagged arrow pointed straight at the heavy, weathered front door of the dark house. I just stared at that word, and my heart started pounding a heavy, chaotic rhythm right against my ribs. The fact that the message was so incredibly simple made it way more terrifying than any graphic threat would have been. It was a direct instruction, a psychological trap that had successfully pulled me off the highway, down an abandoned road, and right to the doorstep of a decaying house. Every single survival instinct in my gut was screaming at me to turn around, run back to my SUV, and get the hell out of there. But to be totally honest with you, I had passed the point of thinking logically. I was completely obsessed with finding out what was going on. I'd already driven into the woods and walked across the field. I knew if I turned around and went home, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if someone was actually trapped, dying, or hiding inside that structure. I mentally justified it by telling myself I'd just look through the window of the door, get one clear answer, and leave. My intense curiosity and stubborn pride were fighting a losing battle against my terror, and they won, pushing me forward against my own better judgment. I turned away from the car and took my first step onto the porch. The old weathered wood groaned incredibly loud under my weight, and the damp timber actually flexed a little under my boots. The porch was covered in peeling, skeletal flakes of paint, and the whole place smelled heavily of rotting wood, wet dirt, and stagnant, muddy water. I walked slowly, taking agonizingly deliberate steps, my eyes locked on the black windows flanking the entrance. Standing up there on the elevated porch with my back wide open to the dark field felt awful. It felt like standing on a stage in a dark theater, knowing invisible eyes were fixed on you from the shadows. I finally reached the front door. It was this heavy, ancient wooden slab, and the top half had these narrow, vertical frosted glass panels. The glass was super textured and filthy, so you couldn't see anything inside clearly. It just blurred everything into vague shapes and light differentials. Right then, I didn't see anything at all behind it. I stood there, my hand shaking a little, slowly reaching out my fingers toward the tarnished brass door handle, trying to decide if I should knock or just try the latch. And that's when a sound broke the silence behind me and completely froze my entire body. It was a distant, violent crunch of gravel. My head snapped around instantly, my eyes wide. I heard the vehicle long before I could see it, this heavy, rhythmic chugging of a low-frequency engine and tires aggressively ripping through the muddy potholes of Old Mill Road. A second later, two bright beams of light burst out of the trees, cutting a wild, erratic path across the tall, wild grass of the field. At that distance, I couldn't see the exact details of the vehicle, but from the loud, throaty exhaust and how high the chassis sat, I figured it was a beat-up four-wheel drive pickup truck. It bounced violently right into the clearing, its headlights flashing wildly up and down the front of the house. Inside the cabin, I could hear the faint, muffled thud of loud music and a bunch of guys shouting and laughing. They seemed like a group of local teenagers out late, messing around on the old country back roads. They weren't bad guys. They were just accidental witnesses who had absolutely no idea what they were driving into. The truck pulled onto the grass and stopped about 20 yards away from the porch. The aggressive glare of their high beams hit me right in the eyes, completely blinding me. I instinctively put my hand up to shield my face, and my vision went totally white, drowning in a washed-out haze. One of the kids leaned out of the driver's side window and yelled across the field, his voice sounding way too loud in that quiet clearing. "Yo, dude, you all right out here? What the hell are you doing?" I couldn't even answer them. I just stood there, completely paralyzed on that rotted porch, my mouth open, utterly overwhelmed by the sudden noise and light. My brain was working in slow motion, completely incapable of processing how to formulate a normal human response to a casual question. I was frozen in the spotlight. The kids realized the situation was super weird, seeing a random, lone guy standing in the dark on the porch of a creepy abandoned house, so they didn't wait around for an answer. The driver immediately threw the truck into reverse, mud spraying everywhere, and started doing a hurried, awkward U-turn in the middle of the overgrown field to get the hell out of there. Because the high beams were burning my eyes, I instinctively turned my face away from the truck, snapping my head back toward the relative darkness of the front door to protect my vision. Right at that exact microsecond, the pickup truck swung sideways to finish its turn. As the truck rotated, its powerful headlights swept horizontally across the front porch like a searchlight, hitting the frosted glass panels of the door from a sharp angle on the side. That moving sidelight cut right through the textured glass, and for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, max, the inside entryway threshold was completely lit up from the side, and right there, pressed almost completely flat against the other side of the glass, was a solid black silhouette. My breath completely died right in my throat. It wasn't a normal human shape at all. I know frosted glass distorts things, but this outline was totally wrong. It was incredibly short, unnaturally wide, like a squat, heavy mass, just standing right on the threshold. But the most horrifying part was the absolute, unnatural stillness. The thing didn't flinch from the sudden bright headlights, and it didn't move away from the door. It just stood completely motionless, a dead wide shadow staring straight through the glass, right at where I was standing. The pickup truck finished its turn and roared back into the mouth of the narrow lane. The headlights swung away, plunging the front door back into darkness, and the silence of the woods crashed down on me again, like an avalanche. Any curiosity I had didn't just disappear. It was completely replaced by pure, primal panic. My brain totally shut down, and my survival instinct took over. I turned around and bolted off that porch. I didn't care about being quiet or making noise anymore. My boots slipped on the damp wood, and I almost wiped out completely down the steps, my feet skidding into the wet mud at the bottom. I ran across that 90-foot field like my life depended on it, breathing so hard my throat burned with ragged, tearing gasps. I didn't look back once. I couldn't. I had total tunnel vision, just staring at the dark shape of my SUV by the trees. Every half second, my mind kept replaying that short, wide shadow behind the glass, and the terrifying realization that it had been standing inches away from me the whole time I was on that porch made me run even harder through the tall grass. I slammed into the side of my SUV, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grab the cold metal door handle. I yanked it open, threw myself into the seat, and locked the doors in one frantic, fumbling move. The inside of the car felt like a total vacuum. I was hyperventilating against the windshield, and my muscles actually ached from the sudden rush of adrenaline. I was shaking so bad, I dropped the keys onto the floor mats twice, desperately clawing around in the dark with my fingers to find them. My fingers finally caught the metal. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted it with everything I had. The engine roared to life and the dashboard lights hit my face. I didn't even bother turning on my high beams or checking my mirrors. I slammed the shifter into drive, stomped the gas pedal to the floor, keeping the steering wheel locked hard to the left. The tires tore up the mud, spraying it into the trees as the SUV swung around in a reckless arc. I gunned it out of the clearing, throwing the car straight into the narrow lane of Old Mill Road. Panic completely took over my driving. I didn't care about damaging the car or the suspension. The SUV hit the first deep water-filled pothole at 40 miles an hour, and a violent jolt slammed through the steering column, nearly ripping the wheel out of my sweaty hands. The car bottomed out with a horrible screech, mud and dirty water splashing in huge sheets across the windows. The lane was way too narrow to be driving this fast. Overgrown branches and thick brush scraped aggressively along both sides of the car, making this non-stop screeching sound like fingernails dragging across the metal panels. I kept my foot pinned to the floor, my eyes wide open, just staring at the gravel track in my low beams and navigating the sharp turns by pure reflex. The car was bouncing so hard, my head hit the roofliner once, but I barely felt it. The only thing that mattered in the entire universe was putting as much distance as possible between me and that house. I flew through those dark woods, leaving the clearing behind in a cloud of tearing gravel and exhaust, gripping the wheel with white knuckles as I raced back toward the highway. What happened after that is mostly a blur. I don't even remember most of the drive back to the highway. My white knuckle grip was locked onto that steering wheel so tight, my fingers went completely numb. My breathing coming in shallow, ragged hitches as the adrenaline slowly started to drain out of my system, leaving me completely hollowed out. Every single pair of headlights that appeared in my rearview mirror made my chest tighten, my eyes constantly darting back and forth to the glass, half expecting to see that gray Impala lurking in the shadows behind me. Even when I finally merged onto the interstate and saw the familiar, predictable green highway signs, the panic didn't stop. It just mutated into this cold, heavy weight. Physically, I was driving away at 70 miles an hour, but mentally, my brain was completely trapped back in that clearing, replaying those 2 or 3 seconds of side light over and over again. By the time I finally pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the sky was just starting to turn a pale, bruised gray. It was somewhere between 4 o'clock and 4:30 in the morning. Walking up the stairs to my place, I felt completely numb, crushed by a level of physical and mental exhaustion I've never experienced in my entire life. I couldn't relax. I didn't even turn on the TV or look at my phone. I just went straight into the bathroom and turned the shower on, as hot as it would go. I stood under that steaming water for a long time, way longer than normal, just staring at the tile wall and trying to process the math of what had happened. I tried desperately to rationalize it, to convince myself that my exhausted mind had just played a trick on me, that the frosted glass had completely distorted a rotted coat rack or a piece of old furniture left in the hallway. But no matter how hard I tried to force a logical explanation onto it, I knew what I saw. I didn't sleep at all that morning, Every time I drifted off and closed my eyes, the darkness behind my eyelids immediately turned into that textured, filthy, frosted glass, and that short, unnaturally wide shadow would materialize right in front of me, perfectly still, just looking through the door. It wasn't some supernatural haunting. It was just the raw, invasive power of a memory I couldn't erase. Because this happened over the weekend, I ended up taking a couple of additional days away from work. I wasn't sick or physically injured, but I was so mentally drained and fragmented that I couldn't even look at a spreadsheet or focus on a single routine task without my mind completely drifting back to Old Mill Road. Eventually, though, the world forces you to move on. After a few days, I went back to the office, sat at my desk, and went through the motions of my normal routine because life simply has to continue. Externally, everything looked exactly the same, but internally, something fundamental had shifted. It's been a while now, and to anyone looking at me from the outside, I'm the exact same practical, data-driven guy I've always been. But the certainty I used to have about how the world works is completely gone. I still lie awake sometimes, replaying the sequence, running through the data points, and trying to find a pattern that isn't there. And I've finally had to accept that I am never going to get any answers. I still don't understand any of it. Who was writing and then wiping those desperate messages into the dust? Who was moving that gray Impala, and how the hell did it keep showing up ahead of me no matter where I went? Was somebody actually sitting in the driver's seat the whole night, watching me from the shadows of those turnouts? Why did those breadcrumbs lead me specifically to that rotted, abandoned house? And more than anything, what exactly was that squat, heavy shape standing completely motionless behind the glass? Was it waiting for me to turn the handle? Sometimes I think about those local kids in the pickup truck. They were just out late, messing around on the back roads, completely oblivious to the fact that they had driven right into the middle of something terrifying. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if their accidental timing changed everything. Maybe their headlights and shouting interrupted something that was about to happen. Maybe they arrived at the exact microsecond I needed them to. Or maybe nothing would have happened at all, and it was all just a series of bizarre coincidences. But a part of me will always believe that those teenagers stopped me from making the absolute biggest mistake of my life. Because if they hadn't pulled into that clearing, if those high beams hadn't cut through the dark at that exact angle to show me what was standing on the other side, I would have turned that brass handle, I would have walked inside, and to this day, I still don't know what was waiting behind that door.